2 in the morning is a cruel hour to believe you are safe. The water had just stopped running, and the bathroom was still fogged with steam, the mirror blurred into a soft gray smear. I stood barefoot on cold marble, one hand clamped around a towel that wasn't mine, listening for any sound outside the door. Noah was asleep somewhere beyond this wall, curled under a blanket on a couch that looked like it belonged in a museum. I kept telling myself this was temporary. One night, one lock, one breath. Tessa had called it a favor, like borrowing a coat. She'd pressed a spare key into my palm earlier that day and told me her brother wouldn't be home until Thursday. I didn't ask questions because questions were how you got found. I let myself imagine that 43 floors above Manhattan, even Derek's anger couldn't climb the elevator. I even let Noah pick the biggest pillow and claim it like a fort. Then the lock clicked, not the gentle click of a door settling, but a precise, practiced sound, like a decision being made. The air changed. Through the thick wood I caught the faint hush of the private elevator, the mechanical sigh that said someone had risen straight into this home without passing a hallway. My skin went tight. I shut off the bathroom light, and the steam glow became dim and blue. In the darkness, every tiny noise sharpened. The soft roll of wheels, the shift of a coat, footsteps that didn't hurry. I grabbed for my jeans where I'd left them on the counter, but my fingers slipped on condensation. The towel threatened to loosen, and I hated how vulnerable that made me feel, like the world could see straight through, skin into panic. My first thought wasn't me, it was Noah. If he woke and wandered toward a stranger, he would do it with the fearless trust of a kid who thought adults were safe by default. I pressed my ear to the door and forced my breathing to quiet. The bathroom door opened without a shove. It swung as if the person outside owned the hinges, owned the air, owned the right to enter. A tall shape filled the gap, backlit by the hallway lights I'd left on. He moved like someone trained to read rooms, not live in them. Dark suit, rolled sleeves, hair neat in a way that looked effortless. His gaze didn't land on my face first. It swept the floor, the sink, the vent, the corners where danger could hide. Then it found me. For half a second I forgot how to speak. I only knew the weight of his attention, heavy as the marble under my feet. This had to be Adrian Moretti, Tessa's brother, the man whose name made building staff straighten even when he wasn't in the room. He held himself still, like a predator deciding whether the thing in front of him was threat or accident. My throat tightened around every explanation I'd rehearsed. I clutched the towel higher and angled my body toward the hallway, ready to block the path to Noah. His hand hovered near his hip, not in a theatrical way, but with the casual certainty of someone who didn't get surprised often. I realized how ridiculous I must look. A single mom in borrowed luxury, dripping water, pretending my life hadn't just shattered. Somewhere behind him, the penthouse stayed silent, that expensive kind of silence that swallowed screams. I listened for Noah's breathing like it was a metronome. Adrian's eyes narrowed, then shifted past me to the counter where my phone sat beside a child's plastic dinosaur. I could almost hear Tessa's voice from earlier, light and reckless, telling me not to overthink it, telling me her brother was all sharp edges but not cruel. She didn't see me now, soaked and cornered, trying to read a man whose face gave nothing away. Adrian's gaze tracked the towel, the damp footprints, the borrowed shampoo on the ledge. He cataloged me the way Derek used to, and my stomach revolted at the comparison. I told myself there was proof on my phone, proof I was invited, proof this wasn't a break-in. His eyes flicked once toward the hallway, and I felt the whole apartment hold its breath with him. I pictured Noah's small sneakers by the door, the way he'd lined them neatly like he was trying to be polite to a house he didn't understand. If Adrian had seen them, would that soften him or sharpen him? I slid my jeans up with shaking hands, not fully dressed, just less exposed, and I stepped closer to my phone before courage ran out. That dinosaur should have been a comfort. Instead, it felt like evidence, like a fingerprint left at a crime scene. Noah had carried it all the way from Queens, refusing to let go, even when I told him we had to travel light. Now it sat there, bright green, accusing me of bringing my child into a stranger's kingdom. From the living room came a soft rustle, the tiny cough Noah made when he shifted in sleep. My heart slammed once, hard. Adrian's focus snapped toward the hallway. I knew I had seconds to explain everything, quietly, before my son woke and the rules of this place closed around us. Adrian's focus snapped toward the hallway, and I tracked it, terrified the sound meant Noah was waking. A small cough drifted from the living room, then silence again. I forced my lungs to slow, the way I'd coached kids before school plays. Panic was loud, and loud got people noticed. I reached for my phone with both hands like it was a fragile glass. The screen lit my damp face, and I hated that it made me easier to read. I opened Tessa's messages, scrolling to the thread from yesterday afternoon, the one that promised safety and now looked like a trap. I held the phone out, but I kept my body planted between him and the hallway. He didn't look at me like a man seeing a woman. He looked at me like a problem entering his system. His eyes swept the counter, the drugstore toiletry bag, the wet jeans, the little dinosaur, every detail that screamed I didn't belong here. He took the phone without a jerk of impatience. It was worse than anger. It was ownership, quiet and certain. I watched his gaze move fast through timestamps and names. When he reached the line about the spare key and the entry code, his jaw hardened, and I felt my stomach drop. That code hadn't come from me, but it sat on my skin like guilt. I'd walked into his fortress because Tessa said I could, because I was too exhausted to argue, because every other door in my life was already burning. Still, I knew what that number meant. His safety had been traded for mine without his consent. The couch creaked again. My pulse leapt. I pictured Noah sitting up, eyes wide, padding toward the sound of grown-ups. I shifted closer to the bathroom doorway, ready to block the hall with my body. If he saw a stranger in the middle of the night, he would ask the kind of innocent question that makes adults dangerous. Adrian glanced toward the living room, then back at me, and something in him reorganized. The threat didn't vanish. It simply became control. He handed my phone back as if the proof had answered one question and opened 10 more. I caught it with hands that felt too clumsy to be mine. He scanned the penthouse like a security feed, and his eyes landed on the entryway. Noah's tiny sneakers sat in a neat line by the door, scuffed soles facing out like he'd learned manners from cartoons. My beat-up tote slumped beside them, overflowing with a paperback and a crumpled school form. Those shoes didn't match the marble, and neither did my life. For a heartbeat, I sensed hesitation in him, quick and almost hidden. Then he set rules the way some people set traps, calmly, precisely. I understood I wasn't to answer the door, not to go near the balcony, not to touch his office, not to stand visible at uncovered windows. Even the staff downstairs would take instructions from him, not me. Part of me wanted to cling to that structure, to the idea that someone finally took danger seriously. Another part of me flinched at every boundary like it was a raised hand. Rules had never been neutral in my past. Derek wrapped his control in words like safety and concern, and my body still remembered how that felt. I dressed as fast as I could, then moved into the living room on quiet feet. Noah was half awake, hair sticking up, dinosaur clenched to his chest like a shield. Confusion clouded his face when he noticed the tall man near the hallway. I crouched, pressed my palm to Noah's back, and guided him toward the guest room before fear could attach itself to this night. When I came back, Adrian stood where he could see the front door and both halls at once, as if he measured exits the way I measured my son's breathing. He didn't throw us out. He made it clear we would stay, for now, because the situation was already compromised and keeping us contained was safer than letting us disappear into the city. Relief washed over me, and then a colder alarm followed. Contained had been Derek's favorite word. I looked at the guest room door, listening for Noah's breathing to settle, and I realized how quickly my life had turned into someone else's rules again. Adrian's rules might keep us alive, but they could also swallow me if I stayed silent. I could already feel the old habit rising, that reflex to nod and apologize and make myself small so the powerful man wouldn't change his mind. But Derek had trained me to survive by shrinking, and that survival had almost cost me Noah. If I wanted this fortress to be a refuge instead of a new cage, I had to tell Adrian the truth why I ran, what Derek did without leaving bruises, what Noah had seen when doors slammed and voices turned sharp. I had to speak before Derek arrived wearing a badge, a smile, or both again. I could feel the urge to apologize crawling up my throat, the old reflex that kept me alive in Derek's apartment. Adrian's rules were reasonable, but my body heard them as a warning. If I stayed silent, I would disappear again, and Noah would learn that silence is only safety. Derek didn't start as a monster. He started as a man who held doors, remembered my coffee order, and called me strong like it was a compliment instead of a prediction. When I got pregnant, he promised steadiness. I believed him because I wanted a story where love meant relief. The first checks felt almost sweet. He wanted my location on, just in case. He asked for my passwords, saying couples shouldn't have secrets. He insisted on walking me to my car at night, then began timing how long errands took. I mistook monitoring for devotion, and I smiled anyway. Once Noah was born, Derek treated my phone like a shared appliance. Notifications had to stay on. Calls had to be on speaker. If my screen lit up after bedtime, he'd watch my face, hunting for a lie I hadn't told. I learned to keep my voice flat like glass. Money became another leash. My paycheck went into an account he organized, and I had to ask before I bought anything bigger than groceries. He'd check receipts like a detective, circling numbers with a pen, then act wounded that I questioned him. I started apologizing for existing in my home. Friends stopped texting after I canceled again and again. Derek hovered by the door when I tried to go out, reminding me he was tired. Noah needed consistency. Strangers were dangerous. He made permission sound like teamwork. Soon I didn't ask to leave. I asked myself if I deserved to. Noah became the pressure point I couldn't defend. Derek corrected the way I packed lunches, the way I buckled car seats, the way I soothed nightmares, until I doubted my instincts. If Noah cried, Derek stared at me as if I'd failed. I began performing motherhood like an exam daily. He never had to say he would take my son. He only had to hint. He kept articles open about unstable mothers. He asked who would believe me if I spiraled. In public, he was gentle. The dad who volunteered. The man neighbors praised. I learned smiles could be weapons. This is the part I'm least proud of. I stayed. I stayed through the smaller humiliations because they weren't bruises you could photograph. I told myself Noah needed a 2-parent home, even when that home felt like a cage. Leaving meant court dates, pickups, explaining too much to strangers alone. The breaking moment was quiet. One evening, Noah drew our family, and he colored Derek's mouth as a thick black line. I asked why, and Noah shrugged like it was normal for grown-ups to be scary. I realized I was teaching him that love meant walking on eggshells every day. I waited for a moment when Derek's attention was somewhere else, and I moved like a thief in my own life. I packed Noah's sneakers, his dinosaur, diapers, and a sweater for me. I didn't take pictures or keepsakes. I took what fit in my arms and ran so fast. Calling Tessa felt like swallowing glass because it meant admitting I hadn't handled it. I'd been the capable one, the mom who smiled through chaos. I told myself I didn't need help, until my hands shook too hard to buckle Noah's seatbelt. Tessa answered, and I let myself be found. I knew Derek wouldn't lose quietly. Men like him need an audience, and he had one. Landlords, school admins, neighbors who saw him as stable. He could cry on command, speak softly, look wounded. I pictured him saying he was worried about my well-being, filing papers, making me the villain. Back in the penthouse, I watched Adrian absorb my story without flinching. He didn't interrupt with fixes or doubts. He listened like a man who had seen cruelty before, and that scared me more. It meant he knew how far Derek could go, and what he would do in return. After I tucked Noah under the blanket, I noticed the apartment like Adrian did. Cameras hid in corners. A security panel pulsed by the door. Windows muted the city roar. Even the air felt managed. I had traded Derek's monitoring for something cleaner, colder, and maybe necessary for now, too. Adrian moved through the space like a man who controlled every variable, and I couldn't tell if that was comfort or warning. I didn't know whether his fortress could shelter us without trapping me, but I knew this. It wasn't a home. It was a system, and systems demanded compliance. In the quiet, I pictured Derek finding the closet empty and turning that loss into a plan. He wouldn't come with flowers. He'd come with paperwork. Adrian watched his security screens like a tracker. If Derek came for us, the fortress would respond. I feared the cost to my freedom. Morning arrived thin and pale, sliding between skyscrapers like it was trying not to be seen. I woke on the edge of the guest bed, fully dressed, listening for Noah's breathing through the cracked door. My muscles still expected shouting. Instead, the penthouse hummed quietly as if it felt nothing. When I stepped into the hallway, I noticed the first line of defense. A keypad glowing beside the door, a second lock above the handle, and a camera tucked into the ceiling corner. Everything looked clean, but the cleanliness felt intentional, almost clinical, like a hospital built for secrets alone. The windows were floor to ceiling, but blackout curtains hung heavy, ready to drop at a touch. The elevator opened straight into the foyer. No shared corridor, no neighbors' footsteps. Even the air seemed filtered, scented faintly with cedar and soap. I breathed deeper, then hated how it worked immediately. That was the problem. My body responded before my mind could argue. Derek used to say rules were for my safety, and my stomach would clench, because safety always came with a price. Here, the price was silence and obedience again. I didn't want Noah learning that lesson from me. I moved through the kitchen like a guest in a museum. Cabinets closed with a soft, engineered hush. A security screen sat on the counter, dark but present. My hands kept checking my pockets for my phone, as if permission could be demanded any time. Old habits don't die on command. Noah patted out in socks, rubbing his eyes, searching for me first. I scooped him close and felt his heartbeat settle against my shoulder. Adrian stayed back, present but controlled, watching the way Noah watched him. That mirror of caution made me ache. Kids know danger before they know words. Adrian put food on the counter without asking what we liked, but he chose the simplest things: toast cut small, fruit washed, a glass of water set where Noah could reach it. He didn't smile. He didn't perform kindness. He just did it. Like responsibility was a language he spoke. Noah ate slowly at first, glancing toward the hallway, then taking bigger bites when nothing bad happened. I watched his shoulders drop a fraction. In our old apartment, he'd jump at the ice maker, at the radiator, at my own sneeze. Here, the sounds were softer, or maybe we were. After breakfast, he found crayons in my tote and started drawing on a napkin. The picture was messy, but it had windows and a sun and a stick figure holding another stick figure's hand. I didn't correct him. I let hope be crooked. Easier than pretending we were fine today. Adrian disappeared into his office, and the door shut with a soft seal. I hated that I felt relieved by that boundary, because boundaries had once been cages. Still, the quiet gave me space to wash Noah's face, comb his hair, and breathe. I listened for trouble anyway, like prayer. Around mid-morning, a quiet buzz came from Adrian's phone on the counter. He returned, glanced at the screen, then at the security panel, and his shoulders tightened. I realized there were people outside this apartment whose job was thinking about me. That thought should have comforted me, but it didn't. I caught a glimpse of names in a message preview, clipped and professional, like a report from a distance. One line included Queens. Another included the name Rose, my grandmother's name, the woman who babysat Noah when I worked late. My mouth went dry instantly. He shouldn't know Rose's address. My first feeling was gratitude so sharp it hurt. My second was anger, just as sharp. He had put eyes on my family without asking me, without warning me, as if my life was another variable to secure. Derek used to do that too, quietly. His reasons were never love. I waited until Noah was busy with crayons, then I asked for clarity without raising my voice. Adrian didn't flinch. He acted like this was obvious, like any responsible adult would protect the nearest target. He confirmed discreet men were near Rose's building and Noah's route since early this morning. I wanted to thank him, and also to demand my consent back. Both feelings lived in my chest at once, twisting together. Noah looked up at me, sensing tension, and I forced a smile for his sake. After he returned to drawing, I felt weaker for needing help I hated. That afternoon, the city outside looked normal from behind bullet-thick glass. Cars moved. People hurried. Somewhere, Derek was probably rehearsing his concerned tone, building a version of me he could sell. And here, Adrian was already placing shields around my loved ones, expecting an attack I couldn't yet see coming. I stood in the hallway, staring at the camera in the corner, and wondered which side of the lens I was on. Protection and surveillance can wear the same face. If Adrian was moving pieces already, it meant he believed Derek was about to strike. The question was how next. Adrian's phone lit up on the kitchen counter while Noah colored at the table. The screen glow was brief, but it changed Adrian's posture the way a siren changes traffic. He went still, shoulders squared, eyes narrowing as if the room itself had shifted. I felt dread before I knew why. The same cold drop I used to get when Derek's footsteps paused outside a locked door. The penthouse stayed quiet, but my pulse didn't. Something outside had moved, and it was coming closer now. He didn't tell me at first. He just turned the phone slightly away, like the information was sharp. Then he pulled up a document, and I saw my name beside a number that made my vision blur. $15,000. Derek had reported it as theft, claiming I'd emptied his money and disappeared with our child. My hands went numb. My ears rang like I'd stood too close to a subway track. I clutched the back of Noah's chair to stay upright. Noah kept coloring, totally unaware. The lie was perfect because it sounded reasonable on paper. Derek could walk into a precinct with calm eyes and say he was worried, that I'd been acting unstable, that I might be spiraling, and that he feared for Noah. He didn't need to shout to hurt me. He just needed a form with an official stamp. Once that story existed, every adult who met me would see a suspect first, a mother second, and a woman last. He could ruin me while smiling politely. Noah lifted his head then, sensing my stillness, and asked with his eyes if something was wrong. I swallowed hard and forced my face into a shape that wouldn't scare him. In Derek's apartment, Noah learned to read tension like weather. Here, I wanted him to forget that skill. But my shaking hands betrayed me, and a crayon snapped in his fingers. The tiny crack sounded loud as thunder in my chest. I realized he didn't need words to absorb fear. He needed my body. The worst part wasn't the idea of handcuffs. It was the picture in my mind of a social worker kneeling beside Noah, speaking gently while he clung to my leg. It was a judge believing Derek's clean story, because clean stories fit courtrooms better than messy truths. If Derek could brand me unstable, he could make my love look like danger. I sat down slowly, palms flat on my knees, and told myself I would not collapse. Not here, not in front of my child. Adrian moved with the calm of someone who expected this kind of strike. He opened a laptop, pulled up building footage, and checked timestamps from the day I arrived. He sent messages that looked like orders to professionals, not pleas to friends. Within minutes, he had a lawyer on a secure line, a plan to contest the report, and a list of documents I didn't know existed. Watching him work steadied me, the way a solid wall steadies a shaking hand, if I feared it. At the same time, his speed unsettled me. Derek used power like a knife, and Adrian used it like a scalpel, precise and cold. I saw how quickly a phone call could move people, how a name could open doors I didn't know existed. I had spent years begging to be believed, and Adrian treated belief as a resource he could purchase and deploy. Relief warmed my ribs, but it came paired with a question I couldn't ignore. What happens when that wall decides everything? Another message flashed on Adrian's screen, and I caught the words Queens and Rose again. Derek wasn't just accusing me. He was pointing his finger at anyone who might help. He could claim Rose was hiding a runaway mother, could send officers to her door, could scare an old woman into silence. He could call my son's school and sound responsible while he asked questions. The lie didn't end at $15,000. It spread, searching for light, and every new ear made it sound more true. I looked at Noah's drawing and felt anger sharpen into something useful. Derek wanted me frantic. Adrian wanted me compliant. Both versions erased me. I couldn't fight a legal war by panicking, but I also couldn't heal by surrendering every decision to another man. I needed to speak, to ask questions, to be part of the plan. My voice shook, but it existed, and that mattered more than sounding brave. I survived Derek by shrinking. I'd survive this by standing, even if my knees shook. Adrian closed the laptop, and I sensed he'd already chosen the next steps for all of us. My gratitude didn't erase the warning bells in my chest. Derek was escalating through institutions, and Adrian was answering with control so absolute it could swallow me if I let it. The report was only the opening move, and I knew the next one would hit harder. Before that happened, I had to confront Adrian and claim my place in my own life. Not tomorrow, not later, now. Adrian's plans kept arriving like silent emails inside my chest. One minute he was on the phone, the next Rose's building had watchers and Noah's school had a new route. I hadn't agreed to any of it. The pattern hit me hard. Men decide. I adapt and call it protection. I waited until Noah was with crackers and cartoons low. Then I asked Adrian to slow down, to explain, to let me choose. I didn't need permission to breathe, but I needed information to parent. If my family was being guarded, I deserved to know who, where, and why today. I told him I wanted clear rules, not shifting ones. I wanted to decide what Noah heard, because children carry whispers like stones. I wanted Rose warned before strangers lingered near her door, and I wanted a voice in every step, even if the step was ugly for me too. Adrian didn't charm his way out. He listened, still as a locked safe, then admitted control was stitched into him. He said structure kept people alive in his world, and that uncertainty killed faster than bullets. He wasn't proud of it, but he wouldn't pretend it away to comfort me. Hearing that honesty rattled me more than anger would have. Speaking up used to come with punishment, silent treatment, slammed doors, a colder bed. My body remembered those consequences and tried to shut my mouth. But silence had consequences too. Silence was how Derek rewrote my life right under me. Noah wandered over with an unfinished drawing and climbed into my lap like nothing had changed. His fingers smelled like orange crackers. He pressed his forehead to my collarbone, a small request for calm. I stroked his hair and felt my own heartbeat slow to match his in that moment. I realized I wasn't asking Adrian to become gentle overnight. I was asking him to stop treating me like cargo. I could handle fear, paperwork, even the ugly parts of his world. But I needed to be a participant. If I lost agency, Noah would lose it too eventually, always. He gave me his terms without raising his voice. Follow safety protocols, tell him before I moved, keep Noah's routines predictable. In return, he would share what he could and explain the rest as limits, not secrets. It sounded fair, yet my stomach still tightened at the word protocols again. So I made my own rule, quietly, in my head. I would agree only if I understood. I would say no when no mattered. I would not let gratitude become a leash. Derek had trained me to confuse control with love. I wouldn't repeat that lesson in a prettier place. While Noah dozed on the couch, Adrian's laptop chimed again. I saw a chart of names and companies, arrows pointing toward docks and warehouses, plus a line labeled shipping compliance. Derek's job had always been vague, wrapped in excuses. Now it looked like a map, and my skin prickled hard. I didn't need jargon to understand danger. Networks meant people. Routes meant money. Money meant leverage. And leverage meant Noah. Adrian's eyes stayed flat when he explained, in careful pieces, that Derek wasn't just a controlling ex. Derek had connections that made paperwork only one weapon among many out there. I agreed to Adrian's rules, but I did it with my spine straight and my questions ready. Partnership or nothing. The moment I chose that, the air felt heavier, like the building knew we'd crossed a threshold. If Derek's reach ran through shipping companies, my enemy was not one man. I pictured Derek in a suit, standing under fluorescent lights, telling a story where he was the reasonable parent. Somewhere, he was already calling favors, nudging systems, pressing buttons. Adrian watched screens like chessboards, and I hated how quickly I started believing his methods were necessary. Fear makes you pragmatic. I asked to see the paperwork myself, to understand what Derek had filed and what could be challenged. Adrian agreed, and a folder appeared on the table like magic, full of dates, copies, and screenshots. Power, I learned, is often just preparation. Still, I wanted my signature on decisions too. That night, Noah slept without jolting awake at the ice maker. He didn't whisper for me to check the hallway. He simply rolled over, trusting the walls. I sat beside him longer than necessary, letting that trust soak into my bones. I promised myself I would protect it by speaking. Adrian kept his distance, but his attention never left us. He moved through rooms as if threats could wear any face, including mine. I saw the cost of his life in the way he checked angles, even while pouring water. It wasn't romance. It was vigilance, sharpened into habit daily. Before bed, I noticed a port map on Adrian's screen, red marks near Newark, and notes about container audits. Derek's name sat beside it like a stain. My throat tightened with recognition. Derek wasn't hunting alone. If he belonged to a network, the fortress was our option for now. Maybe. Adrian stopped mid-step in the hallway, the way people pause when a distant alarm reaches them first. His shoulders tightened, and his eyes went past me, past Noah's cartoons, toward the office screens. I felt the shift in the air before any explanation arrived. It made my stomach go cold. On the desk lay folders that hadn't been there last night, each labeled with names I didn't recognize. A city map was pinned to corkboard, red marks circling ports and warehouses. Adrian had a timeline open, dates stacked like dominoes, and my name sat among them like evidence, not family. He showed me a report summary, and I understood the ugly logic without needing details. Derek's company wasn't just shady. It moved containers through channels that fed bigger predators. The phrase cartel adjacent appeared, clinical and terrifying. My mouth tasted metal, and my spine went ice like winter under my skin. I had imagined Derek as a single threat I could outrun with buses, shelters, and silence. Now I saw the difference between a man and a network. Networks didn't get tired. They didn't need court orders. They only needed someone to ask the right questions, and wrong people answered fast. My mind ran through Noah's vulnerabilities in quick, brutal math. The sign-in sheet at school. The teacher who smiles and chats too freely. The predictable route from Queens to Manhattan. A custody form with my address. Any one of those could become a breadcrumb trail leading straight back to him. I had to stop myself from spiraling because panic makes mothers loud, and loud mothers get labeled unstable. I pressed my palm to Noah's head as he leaned against my hip, and I promised myself I would think like a strategist, not a hunted animal even when fear begged me. Adrian made calls in fragments, never saying full names near open doors. He asked for shipping manifests, background checks, and financial leaks. He moved pins on the map with calm fingers, as if rerouting trucks. Watching him, I realized he wasn't guessing. He was confirming what he already suspected today. His fortress rules suddenly sounded less like control and more like triage. Still, I kept my boundary alive inside my ribs. I would follow protocols, but I would not vanish. If I stayed quiet, Derek would write my story again. If I spoke, I might survive it with Noah watching. That afternoon, he slid a small box across the table, a new phone, a slim laptop, and a note of passwords written in clean block letters. He explained they were untraceable, registered elsewhere. I didn't take them like gifts. I took them like tools to rebuild my life from scratch. I opened a secure email and felt a strange rush of independence. Derek couldn't see my screen. He couldn't read my drafts. I could message Rose without fear of tracking, schedule a lawyer consult, and save copies of documents. For the first time in months, my thoughts felt private again. I thought leaving Derek was the hardest part. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning that my old life had been built on hidden pipes and dirty money, and that my escape hadn't ended the story. It had only moved me to a new chapter with higher stakes today. Near sunset, Adrian received another report, and I recognized the coded tone even without hearing words. An unfamiliar sedan had been parked across from Rose's building for 2 hours. Another face had been seen near Noah's daycare entrance, lingering too long, pretending to check a phone. My stomach clenched hard. This wasn't paperwork anymore. This was perimeter testing. I pictured a man smiling at Rose in the lobby, asking harmless questions, collecting details. I pictured Noah's backpack swinging as he walked out, watched by someone who didn't care he was 6. I swallowed fear and asked what we do next. Adrian's response was immediate, methodical, and it made my skin crawl with both comfort and dread. He talked about changing routes, tightening building access, and documenting every sighting. I insisted Rose be warned in plain terms, not vague hints. If danger was near my family, they deserved clarity right now. The idea of slipping into a cheap hotel and starting over quietly died in that moment. Networks follow patterns. They pay people to notice. They don't need my face on a flyer. They need my child's schedule, my grandmother's address, my habits. Adrian's fortress started to feel like armor now. Noah fell asleep, and I watched his eyelashes flutter, trying to memorize peace. Outside, the city kept moving, and a stranger sat in a car, waiting. I realized Derek wasn't only searching for me. He was measuring my defenses. The next step would be closer, and I couldn't ignore it. I checked the locks twice, not because Adrian asked, but because my brain needed ritual. I pictured Rose answering her door, Noah stepping off a curb, and Derek smiling like he belonged. If he was testing the perimeter, he would cross it. When that happened, we wouldn't pretend anymore again. Adrian's phone vibrated once, a soft insect buzz on the marble counter, and the whole penthouse seemed to hold its breath. He read, went still, then looked at me like I was already falling. Noah's cartoon kept playing, but the room around it turned colder as danger slipped in silently. The update was brief but brutal. A gray sedan idled by Rose Carter's Queens building, driver pretending to scroll a phone, watching the lobby doors between delivery trucks. Someone had tracked her grocery routine. My stomach flipped. I pictured my grandmother carrying bags, unaware she was now a marker too. Trauma tried to hijack my body the way it always did, sending heat to my face and ice to my hands, urging me to run without thinking. I forced my shoulders down, counted breaths, and checked Noah first. If I panicked, he would learn panic before he learned safety again. Noah glanced up from his crayons, sensing the tremor in my voice even though I kept it low. He climbed into my lap and pressed his cheek to my chest, as if he could glue me together. I kissed his hair and promised myself he would not be collateral today. I took the secure phone Adrian had given me and stepped into the hallway, turning my back to the windows. I called Rose and kept my tone calm, describing a safety drill, not a crisis. I told her to stay inside, avoid posting, and call me before opening the door. Then I reached the daycare office number from memory and repeated the same careful approach. I asked them to verify pickup identities, to keep Noah inside until I arrived, and to treat any sudden questions about me as suspicious. My voice stayed steady, but my knees felt hollow underneath it. Adrian's people moved like shadows I could not see, yet their presence changed everything. Building staff received new lists. The elevator required extra confirmation. A second camera feed appeared on the kitchen screen. Adrian altered Rose's watcher rotation and added a car near the daycare around us instantly. For a moment I stood at the sink, hands under running water, trying to feel only gratitude. Someone powerful was taking us seriously. But the same part of me that had survived, Derek also whispered that being protected could become being owned if I stopped asking questions and stopped choosing. The next update landed worse. The gray sedan was no longer just waiting. Derek himself had been seen on Rose's block, dressed like a normal commuter, walking past the deli twice, pausing by the mailbox area as if he belonged. He was testing whether fear would pull me out alone. My vision narrowed, and a roar filled my ears like ocean surf. I wanted to sprint to Queens, to stand between him and Rose with my bare hands. Instead, I sat, planted both feet, and reminded myself that Derek fed on urgency. I would not hand him my location ever. I sent Rose a second message through the secure channel, simpler than before, telling her to ignore unexpected knocks and to let building staff handle visitors. I also asked her to keep her phone charged and her curtains closed. Each instruction tasted like paranoia, but it was survival now too. Noah shuffled into the kitchen holding his dinosaur, eyes closed, and he reached for me without understanding why I looked pale. He asked about Grandma Rose with that hopeful certainty, and my throat tightened. I lifted him onto my hip and told myself calm was a weapon I could use. Adrian asked one of his men for a live feed, and the screen showed Rose's sidewalk from across the street. The image was boring, and that boredom felt precious. I inhaled once, slow. If I could keep my head clear, I could keep Noah's world intact, even inside this fear. Adrian watched me hold Noah, and I saw the calculation behind his eyes. Not coldness, but triage. Derek had crossed from court threats to doorstep intimidation. Adrian decided the way to stop a man like that was to meet him away from my family and make the boundary unmistakable today. Fear hit me in a new shape. I was not only afraid Derek would find us, I was afraid of what Adrian might do to stop him. Adrian lived in consequences, not warnings. Part of me wanted to keep him here. Part of me knew that would pull Derek closer. He prepared to leave, and the penthouse tightened around us like a jaw. He checked the code, the cameras, the deadbolts, then looked at Noah as if memorizing him. I understood his unspoken instruction. Stay inside and trust the system until he returned. I hated how I wanted to obey. When the elevator took him down, silence rushed back in. I carried Noah to the couch and held him longer than he needed. Derek had shown up where he should not, and that changed the rules. Now I waited in the fortress while Adrian went out to draw the line. Time moved wrong after Adrian left. The penthouse stayed bright, the city glinting outside, yet inside it felt like the lights had been dimmed on purpose. I locked the door twice, then stood with my palm on the wood, listening for a sound that would tell me what happened next. Noah finally fell asleep on the couch, dinosaur tucked under his chin. I sat on the floor beside him and watched his chest rise and fall, counting breaths the way I used to count seconds in Derek's apartment. In that old life, silence meant the storm was loading. Here, silence meant the storm might already be on the elevator. I tried to distract myself with the secure phone, with the new email address, with the neat folder Adrian had left on the table. Every few minutes I checked the camera screen, as if my eyes could stop a man in Queens from moving. My mind kept racing through worst cases. Derek showing up with officers, Derek charming Rose in the lobby, Derek telling a story where I was unstable and Adrian was some stranger who kidnapped us. The fear wasn't only that Derek would find us. It was that Adrian would prevent him in a way that burned the last bridges of my normal life. Adrian's world ran on consequences, and I didn't know which consequences he considered acceptable. I hated that part of me wanted him to be ruthless, because ruthless sounded like relief. Noah stirred once, whimpering in his sleep, and my whole body tightened. I smoothed his hair until he relaxed again. That tiny moment reminded me what mattered. Not revenge, not pride, just a small boy learning that night can be quiet. I told myself to breathe like a mother, not like prey. I kept rehearsing what I would say if someone forced the door, even though Adrian had promised no one could. My brain wasn't logical. It was trained. In Derek's place, mistakes earned lectures, then colder punishment. Here, I still waited for consequences, as if safety had to be paid for with pain. The building made its own sounds while I waited. A distant whoosh in the vent, a soft click as the thermostat adjusted. Somewhere far below, a siren wailed and faded. I kept imagining the private elevator sliding upward, carrying either Adrian or Derek or the consequences of both. When the elevator finally hummed, I felt it through the floor before I heard it. The air shifted, as if the penthouse recognized its owner returning. The lock turned with the same decisive click as the night before. Adrian stepped in, and the first thing I noticed was not his face, but his hands. He smelled faintly of cold air and rain, like he'd been outside longer than he wanted. His expression was sealed, but the tension around his mouth told me the conversation had been short, already final. One knuckle looked split, a thin line of red already drying. His cuff was wrinkled, a button missing, like a small struggle had happened and been erased quickly. He moved carefully, not injured enough to limp, but controlled enough to hide pain. His gaze swept the room, finding Noah asleep, then finding me, and I understood he had done what he went to do. He didn't boast. He didn't ask for praise. He washed his hands, then sat at the kitchen island like a man closing a file. I brought the first aid kit from the cabinet, the same one I used earlier for Noah's scraped knee, and I took his hand gently, as if sudden motion might wake the entire building. The cut wasn't deep, but it was angry. I cleaned it with warm water, then antiseptic, then wrapped gauze around his knuckles. He watched my face instead of his hand, as if reading whether he scared me. I felt fear, yes, but it was fear of what power can become, not fear of him in that moment. Mostly I felt relief so sharp it made me dizzy. Safety can feel like a drug when you've lived on adrenaline for too long. With Adrian near, my lungs wanted to unclench and stay that way forever. That hunger scared me. I didn't want to trade one dependence for another. I wanted choice to be real, even when it was hard. When I finished, my fingers lingered on the bandage, and the room went quiet in a different way. Adrian's attention held mine, heavy and steady, and I felt myself leaning toward him without thinking, like a plant turning to light. Then my mind flashed Noah's shoes by the door, the way he watched adults for cues, and I pulled back. I let the space return between us. I told myself I needed time, that gratitude wasn't love, that relief wasn't permission to dissolve into someone else. Adrian accepted the distance without chasing it, and that mattered. The threat outside felt quieter now, but the truth inside felt louder. We were changing, and the calm we'd bought would demand a price in the days ahead. Morning came softer after the confrontation, as if the city itself decided to tiptoe. I woke before Noah, not from fear this time, but from habit, and listened to the quiet machinery of the penthouse. The espresso grinder clicking once, the thermostat breathing, the distant hush of traffic 40 floors down. My shoulders stayed high for a minute, waiting for the old shock, then slowly dropped. I pulled the curtains back only a hand's width, letting a stripe of light cut across the floor. The light didn't feel like exposure. It felt like permission. Noah woke hungry, which felt like a miracle. He asked for toast, then ate it without scanning the room first. He built a dinosaur parade across the coffee table and narrated it in whispers, careful not because he was scared, but because he was still half asleep. I washed dishes and realized my hands were steady. Adrian moved in and out of the kitchen with the same controlled quiet, setting out fruit and water like a routine he'd memorized overnight. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The calm was doing the talking. Later, while Noah watched cartoons at low volume, I wandered the hallway and noticed a painting I'd ignored before. Bold strokes of blue and rust, layered like someone refusing to stay inside lines. I stood there too long, fingers itching for a pencil. I used to carry sketchbooks the way other people carried wallets. I used to plan my days around museums and cheap art stores and Sunday mornings that smelled like paint water. Derek didn't steal that from me in one fight. He starved it slowly, until wanting anything felt selfish. In the penthouse, the wanting came back, small but stubborn. Tessa came by on the third day, breezing in with a bag of pastries and the kind of energy that tried to make fear look temporary. She studied Noah first, like a nurse reading vitals, and her shoulders softened when he didn't flinch at the door. Then she studied me. I could tell she was looking for signs of captivity, not bruises. In her own blunt way, she reminded me that her brother's protection had weight, and weight could become pressure. She didn't ask me to distrust him. She asked me to stay awake inside myself. She wanted me to keep my edges. That afternoon, I accidentally overheard enough to understand the shape of Adrian's life. His office door was cracked, and the voices on the other end of a secure call carried the clipped rhythm of men discussing risks, routes, and consequences. I didn't catch details, only the tone, calm, transactional, and absolute. When Adrian stepped out, his face looked unchanged, but his eyes had the distant focus of someone calculating losses. He didn't hide that he had rules. He also didn't pretend the world he worked in was clean. The truth settled in my stomach like a stone. Choosing his protection meant standing near his shadows. I didn't want a perfect man. I wanted a safe life for my son and a real life for myself. But safety couldn't be bought with blindness, and love couldn't be built on me looking away. I started naming my lines in my head. Noah comes first. No cruelty that spills onto innocent people. No lies that turn me into a prop. If Adrian asked me to disappear into his world, I would leave, even if leaving hurt. The fact that I could think that sentence at all felt like healing. 2 mornings later, a delivery arrived with no branding, just a plain box and a receipt that listed nothing personal. Adrian set it on the dining table and walked away like it wasn't a big deal. Inside were watercolor pads, Brushes, charcoal pencils, and tubes of paint arranged by color. I touched them the way you touch something you're afraid will vanish. Noah's eyes went wide, and he asked if we could make a mess. I almost laughed, because yes, that was the point. Adrian had not given me jewelry or speeches. He had given me tools, which felt like respect. Later, I tested a brush in a cup of water and watched pigment bloom like a secret. Noah insisted on painting a sun, then painted it purple just to see if the world allowed it. Adrian passed the doorway, paused, and left a clean cloth beside my elbow without a word. The gesture was small, but it said he expected creation here, not just survival for us both. That night, after Noah fell asleep, I stacked the supplies in a corner of the guest room and noticed the treadmill had been moved slightly, as if someone had measured the space. A small detail, but it made my chest tighten. I realized someone was making room for my dreams the way I'd once made room for Noah's crib, shifting furniture without complaint. Fear was still in the building, humming behind the locks, but something else had arrived too. Possibility. And possibility, I was learning, is harder to run from than fear. I noticed the door at the end of the hallway was cracked open, spilling warm light onto the dark wood floor. The penthouse usually felt controlled and dim, but this glow smelled faintly of paper and clean pine. My steps slowed, because surprises had never been kind to me before. I pushed it wider and stopped in the threshold. The treadmill and stacked boxes were gone. In their place stood an easel facing the window, a blank canvas waiting, and shelves lined with paints arranged by color. A small lamp angled down like someone cared about shadows in here too. A sturdy table hugged one wall, protected by clear plastic, with jars for water and rags folded neatly at the corner. Brushes sat in cups, bristles up like a bouquet. Even the chair looked intentional. A soft armchair with a throw, as if rest mattered to this room as well. For a moment I couldn't move. Something in my chest loosened, like a knot I'd forgotten was there. I pressed my fingertips to the edge of the table, expecting dust or emptiness, and found clean wood and fresh paper. Hope felt unfamiliar, but it was real again right then today. Before Derek, I used to sketch in diners and on subway platforms, chasing faces and light. I kept cheap pencils in every bag. I told myself I'd paint a series about mothers on fire escapes, about resilience without applause. Then my life shrank, and my hands went quiet too long. Now Noah stood beside me, peeking into the room with his dinosaur tucked under his arm. His eyes widened at the colors, not at the locks. I realized he'd never seen me create, only survive. If he watched me paint, he might learn joy is allowed for us both too. I turned and saw Adrian in the hallway, leaning against the frame like he didn't want to crowd the moment. He had made space without demanding gratitude. Still, my throat tightened with it. A room like this made leaving harder, and that scared me, because dependence is slippery at first. I let myself feel grateful, but I also named my boundary silently, the way you mark a map. I needed the freedom to walk away if my lines were crossed. Love that relies on captivity is just another prison. I would not trade Derek's cage for a prettier one ever. Adrian didn't argue or soften the truth with promises. He simply nodded once, then stepped back, leaving the door open behind him. That small retreat mattered more than words. It said I could breathe here without signing my life away. Protection, in his hands, could include distance too when needed. Later I set Noah up with a tiny palette and a cup of water, and we painted side by side. He made a purple sun again, then laughed when it bled into blue. I found myself laughing too, surprised by the sound. The fortress still existed, but so did we. That evening, Adrian received an update from his investigator. Derek had withdrawn from the neighborhood, sold his lease, and booked a one-way flight out of state. The report used calm language, but I felt my knees go weak anyway. Relief arrived, and then it hesitated at the door still there. Because trauma doesn't vanish when a plane takes off. My body kept listening for footsteps in the hall, for a key turning, for the old punishment. I checked Noah's face for tension, even while he slept. Hypervigilance was a habit now, but I reminded myself habits can change slowly too. In the studio, the cameras felt farther away. The locks were still there, but the blank canvas made the system feel human. I understood the difference. A fortress can protect a body, but creation protects a soul. Derek tried to erase mine. This room quietly refused his version of me. I began to imagine mornings where Noah packed a lunch without fear, afternoons where I emailed schools from a safe account, nights where I painted until my wrists ached in a good way. None of it was guaranteed, but imagining felt like rebellion, and I was tired of only reacting. Rose called through the secure line to say she was fine, annoyed but safe, and I let myself smile at that stubbornness. Family felt like an anchor again, not a liability. I pictured bringing Noah to Queens for Sunday dinner someday, without scanning the street first. The thought warmed me. I stood in the doorway of the studio after Noah went to bed, staring at the canvas and the arranged paints. Adrian's fortress could keep danger out, but it couldn't decide my future. I could. The question rose. Was I staying because I had to, or because I chose to? Noah slept in his room with the dinosaur at his side, and I watched through the door, letting peace be proof. Behind me, studio light glowed like sunrise in the fortress. I didn't know what tomorrow held, but I knew the next chapter would be mine to write from now. That night, I stood in the studio with a brush between my fingers and watched water turn pigment into something alive. The window showed Manhattan like a necklace of lights, but inside the room felt soft, not sharp. Noah slept down the hall without flinching at every creak, and I realized fear no longer drove my body the way it used to. It still visited, but it didn't own the steering wheel. I could breathe, I could pause, I could decide what the next minute looked like instead of surviving it. For the first time, calm felt enough to trust. I didn't stay because a powerful man told me to stay. I stayed because I finally understood the difference between safety and control. Derek demanded my obedience and called it love. Adrian offered protection and demanded rules, but he also let me ask why. Let me say no. Let me hold my line. I made my own promise. If I ever felt myself shrinking again, I would walk out, even if the door was heavy. Staying only means something when leaving remains possible, and I needed that truth like oxygen. I won't trade Cage for another. Not now. Not ever. Noah is the reason my boundaries matter. He watches my choices and learns what love looks like from my posture, not my speeches. In the old apartment, he learned to listen for footsteps and measure moods. Here, he learned to sleep, to laugh, to paint a purple sun without looking over his shoulder. Rose stayed our anchor, stubborn and steady, reminding me that family can be a harbor, not a hostage. When I call her now, I don't whisper like I'm guilty. I plan. I protect. I show my son that home can be built even when world feels unstable. Adrian isn't a saint, and I'm not pretending he is. I've seen enough to know his world runs in shadows, with debts and threats tucked behind polished doors. But I've also seen his code, the lines he refuses to cross, the way he protects without asking me to disappear. I don't romanticize danger. I just respect honesty. I choose him the way I choose my brush. Carefully, with awareness, with steady hands. Healing isn't a finish line. It's chapters. Some pages will be calm, some will shake, and I'll still be writing. That is freedom, and it looks like me. A week later, an anonymous email hit my secure inbox with a single line about unfinished business and a location code I didn't recognize. It could have been nothing, a prank, a leftover ripple from Derek's world, but my stomach still tightened. I saved it, sent it to Adrian's attorney, and went back to the studio anyway. Because safety isn't the absence of threat, it's the presence of tools, people, and choices. Derek's shadow may stretch, but it doesn't get to steer. I can live alert without living afraid, and that balance is my new victory for Noah and me. If you're listening and you've ever had to rebuild yourself, I hope my story reminds you that leaving is brave, but choosing yourself afterward is braver. Tell me in the comments what safety means to you, or the moment you stopped apologizing for surviving. If this chapter touched you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story we tell. I'm still learning, still painting, still mothering, still choosing. And tonight, that is enough for me. Tomorrow will come, and I will meet it awake. Final section, no subsequent transition.